So some basic features of the grant structures for the arts in Finland. And this is basically intended and produced for artists that are maybe not yet so acquainted with how the grant system works in Finland. So these are some basic information concerning the whole system and setting of grants. And first of all, I'm giving you an outline of the contents of this presentation. I'm going to first give you some ideas and considerations concerning the several bodies that are awarding grants for the arts and artists in Finland. Then I'm going through some specificities of types of grants, what kind of grants there are available, and what are the nature and features of various types of grants. Then I'm going to give you some outlines and basic settings in terms of how the grant system is connected with social insurance systems for social benefits and taxation in Finland. And the last part of this session will be dealing with grants awarded by the Arts Promotion Center of Finland. What are the specific features that we have here in Taike? So these are things that will be touched upon in this speech that I'm going to now start. First of all, to give you an outline of the variety of funders for the arts. As said, I am here presenting Arts Promotion Center of Finland, which is the main governmental funding body for the individual artists and art funding. And you can find all the information concerning our activities from the website that you can see on the slide. And naturally, when you have logged in for this session, you have also used the website. Apart from our activities, Finland is a country of foundations and funds for arts, and we actually are internationally rather peculiar in that sense. Many of the Europe's largest art funding organizations, private organizations, are in Finland. And there is a society for the foundations and funds in Finland for arts and sciences that give also awarding grants, which is called Säätiöt ja rahastot in English, Association of Finnish Foundation. And altogether in that association, there are 240 members, which include both funders for the arts and for sciences. But all the largest funders, private funders of art, are included in that association. Out of the 240, there are foundations that are rather small. There are ones that are only concentrating on sciences, but majority of those do have something to do with art as well. And here in the list that I've outlined are the 8 biggest private foundations supporting artists and art in Finland. Finnish Cultural Foundation, Svenska Kulturfonden, Kone Foundation, Jane and Aatos Erkko Foundation, Konstsamfundet, Vihuri Foundation, Kordelin Foundation, and Saastamoinen Foundation. And all of these foundations and funds are dealing with more than 2 million euros annually for arts and artists. Apart from these named organizations and apart from foundations and funds, grants for artists are also awarded by several municipalities in Finland. Basically, all the largest municipalities, cities in Finland have some kind of grant scheme of their own, but that differs a lot with cities. They all have their own systems, and naturally the city of Helsinki is biggest in this sense. The resources used for art is biggest. Also, in addition, we have some other state organizations or state-funded organizations that award also grants for the artists. I've here outlined 2 examples. One is Finnish Music Foundation and another one is Frame Contemporary Art Finland. Finnish Music Foundation is dealing with copyright funding and what can be awarded from those kinds of funds to artists, and according to the name, that is specifically intended for music, for the branch of music. And we have also similar kinds of structures, for example, for audiovisual arts and artists. Frame Contemporary Art Finland is dealing with visual arts, and that is one of our international information centers, which means that we also have other kind of organizations dealing with other forms of art. But this gives you an outline that the variety of funders for the art in Finland is actually very large. A chart for the current situation, unfortunately partly in Finnish. This gives you an idea of the sums of money various bodies are dealing with. So this chart, the title in English is Grants and Subsidies for the Arts, and figures indicate millions of euros. And the legend for this chart says that the blue ones are the support by the foundations for the arts, and the orange one is the support that Taike is awarding for arts and arts organizations. And you can see from this chart that the private funding for the arts from the foundations has for several years been bigger than the one that Taike actually is offering. And it as well is increasing more rapidly at the moment. So we are approaching a situation where private funding for the art is going to be doubling the amount that Taike can deal with when in terms of awarding funding for the arts. But altogether, actually we don't have an exact number how much is being used to support arts and give grants for artists, but the overall figure is actually approaching almost 200 millions at the moment, having calculating also the awards and grants that are being awarded by municipalities. So in overall terms, this is an expanding way of funding arts, and there are several players in the field. Some basic features and differences when comparing various funders. Taike's own part is that we are working under the legislation, so our work is statutory. And all the operations that we are dealing with are open and public and transparent, which means that, for example, the identity of our peer reviewers is public information, and all the decisions for allocation of funding are based on political decisions. So in annual state budget, there's made a decision what is the overall amount of funding that we are getting to give grants for artists. We have some statutory grants listed here, artist grants, public display grants, etc., that have an own legislation that is founding and defining what is the nature of those forms of grants. And especially now here in an English language environment, it's always important to emphasize that we don't have any restrictions based on language or nationality of grant applicants. So if your work is dealing with art in Finland in one way or another, you are basically qualified as an applicant for our system. I didn't want to give you more information concerning the differences between private foundations, but here are maybe two kind of basic modes of thinking when it comes to private foundations. We have some examples of major foundations that have both a national fund and regional funds, which means that those foundations have also several different calls during the year. And especially here, Finnish Cultural Foundation and Svenska Kulturfonden are remarkable exceptions. Both of those have, apart from the national fund, they also have regional funds and recent regional calls for applications. Then we have some private foundations that have rather, let's say, exact definitions in terms of emphasis of what kind of art they are supporting. And here I've named Kone Foundation and Jane and Aatos Erkko Foundation as examples, because those two foundations are giving bigger individual sums of money for applicants, and they both have a kind of strategy of having also maybe more strategical investments for art projects and arts organizations. Another one that I took here as an example is Kordelin Foundation, which is openly saying that it's focusing on selected art forms, and especially at the moment they are focusing on literature and visual arts. So that is a way kind of to tackle the amount of applications that these foundations are receiving. So they are giving kind of restrictions. What is the emphasis that they are dealing with? But in the following, some basic things concerning the types of grants that are being awarded and handled in our institutions. First of all, some things concern the nature of grants. In all the funders, there's always a call for application behind everything. And the decision is based on the criteria that is being explicated in the calls for applications. It's always based on handling the applications and making the peer reviewing processes when it comes to dealing with art applications. It is notable that during a year cycle, there are several different application periods. So basically there is almost at all times, there are some application periods going on in various foundations and in one of their foundations. And there are tens and tens of different periods for applications, which means that one has to follow closely the information provided by the founders and foundation. Funding for the arts is always discretionary, which means that these are individually being assessed, and there is no automatic right for any art funding. That is always based on the reviewing and peer reviewing of the applications. And I have here some examples that what that means in practice, and from Taike's point of view, an example from the artist grant system. Approximately 8% of our applicants that apply for artist grant in Taike receive a positive decision. There are variations concerning art forms. This is more difficult in some of the art forms and easier in other art forms, but this is kind of approximation of all the art forms. Which means that there are always many applicants that fulfill all the criteria that are being announced in the calls for applications, but still cannot be awarded a grant because of the lack of resources. And that is also what discretionary means in this sense, that even though you qualify as a professional artist, you are meeting with all the criteria, doesn't necessarily equal that you are going to get the funding from these systems. And I have here another example from the private foundation field. The last call that Kone Foundation was given in autumn 2024, they had altogether 6,650 applications in their decision making, including both sciences and the arts. And this is even higher than any of the singular numbers that we have in Taike, which gives you an idea of the quantity of applications that are being dealt with in these processes. Artist grant funding decisions are always based on the future plans, which means that the funding is not based on previous work. We are not funding things that have happened already, but we are funding things that are going to happen, which means that always the assessment of the application is concentrating on work plans for the future. And a general outline also for the whole system is that artist grants and art grants are awarded primarily to art professionals. And in the case of Taike, this is something that doesn't have many exceptions at all. But for private foundations, they are more open occasionally with this kind of interpretation. What does art professional mean in their standing? But basically, almost totally the funding schemes that we have in Finland are based on art professionals. And naturally that leads to a question how to define an arts professional, but that is another question apart from this session. Grants can be of two types. The one is working grants and the other one are the project grants. Basically, all the funders are providing both in some form or another. Working grants are basically intended to support artists' and applicants' own full-time artistic work. There are some occasions that working can be also part-time, but this is the general rule that the support is for artists' own full-time artistic work. Working grants are intended to cover living expenses, which means that this is kind of the salary of the work that is being done by the artist. Amount of tax-free working grant is being defined by the level of state artist grant annually. And for this year at the moment, the level for tax-free working grant is a bit less than 2,200 euros a month. That sum will be verified during springtime, but this is now the exact amount of the maximum amount that one can get grant as tax-free. Generally speaking, all the funders are closely looking at each other's funding decisions, meaning that basically we all try to avoiding grants simultaneously for the same artists. So basically, there are very few, if any, overlapping working grants for individual artists. Taike and the largest foundations award multi-year working grants. The longest that we offer currently are 5-year working grants, and some of the foundations have either 3 or 2-year working grants. And naturally, of course, also shorter ones. The shortest ones that Taike is awarding as working grant are at the moment 4-month periods for working. We in Taike are rather unflexible when it comes to the time scale and time scope that the grant can be used. And the reason for that is that our resources are based on state budget, but private foundations may be more flexible regarding when and what is the period that the grant can be used. And there are always some definitions for this in the decisions made by the funders. Types of grants, number 2, project grants. So these kinds of grants are mainly intended for individual projects and the expenses that are being caused by the projects that are being funded. Depending on the funding body, the project grants may also have some parts of funding that also covers working in the project, but there are several rules that vary from founder or funders to others, so always you should check the rules that funders have for these kinds of issues. So what are the rules, what kind of costs are eligible when you are applying for project grants? And regularly one can both apply for one's own personal purposes or for the purposes of working groups. So in Taike's instance, you can also have projects that have several people working in the project, and you can then cover expenses of the ones that are being named in the working groups for the projects. Following on some basic features concerning the impacts grants have in terms of social insurance systems, social benefits, or taxation. And I have 3 slides here in this part of the session. And the first is some basic features concerning social benefit system and grant systems. First point is that according to legislation, all working grants that are exceeding 4 months period are, according to the law, one is required to have a insurance included, pension insurance included. One has to take one if one gets a working grant of that amount. And the insurance covers, even though it's called pension insurance, it covers also some other social benefits, as for example health, in the case of sickness or things like that. So one can get also some other benefits by paying for the insurance. Funding bodies always notify the insurance institute that one has got a working grant that exceeds the limits, but the recipient is responsible for taking the insurance and for paying the insurance with the money that one gets as a grant. So you have to take care that you are communicating with the insurance company in that sense. If you are working in a working grant, in some instances you can get allowances from this pension insurance company, which is called Mela, and you can get some sickness allowances if you cannot work according to the working plan and work in a way that the grant is originally intended. And naturally, also Finland, we have the social security system by Kela, and they have different responsibilities, these two insurance instances, when it comes to sickness allowances. If you are getting a state artist grant, there are some points which are eligible causes that you can postpone the start of the grant period. And what is important is that if you have long enough sickness leaves, maternity leaves, or breaks like that, you can have you can interrupt the working period for your artist grant. Other funders might have some other rules in terms of postponing the use of the grant due to sickness, due to maternity leave, or things like that. And please check their guidelines for these kinds of issues. And in the final point in this slide, there is a definition of the MYEL insurance contribution, which means that in our system, if you are working in a grant, you are getting calculated a so-called MYEL insurance amount, which is the basis of some social security issues that you are dealing with. And you should here take into consideration that if you are paying the Mela insurance, that basically aids you in the cases that you might have problems, that increases the amount that you can get as a sickness allowance, that increases the allowance that you can get in case of maternity leaves, etc. So this is kind of support your conditions if something like that happens. Some basic features concerning grants and unemployment security. So if your working with a grant is considered full-time, that means that you are not entitled for an unemployment benefit during the time of your working grant. The only exception for this is that, as said, some of the private foundations have part-time working grants. And in those cases, it might be possible that you are getting both. You are getting the part-time grant together with an unemployment security payments, but that is an exception for this basic rule. If you become an unemployed job seeker after your grant period ends, you are going to then be asked questions and asked for materials from the unemployment office that you are dealing with. And they, for example, need to know the grant decision that has been made for you for your grant period. And that is the basis of the decisions made then afterwards later on by the unemployment offices in Finland. If the grant decision that you have got doesn't indicate exact period of work, you are probably going to be asked for the applications that you have submitted for the funder, and that will be asked by the unemployment office in Finland. They occasionally also ask for that kind of information from us, and we are then providing them with that information. However, if you are working as a grant with a grant, that doesn't count to so-called working conditions for unemployment benefits, which means that if you are working, for example, as an artist grant and you are getting the 2,200 euros a month as grant, that is not counted as your benefit if you are getting unemployed later on. So the calculation concerning your employment fees is not based on the grant amount that you have received. It's based on other forms of income that you might have received before the grant period. And the last one in this consideration, the connections with grants and taxation. So as said in the beginning, the grants up till the sum of the artist grant, meaning 2,200 euros a month, are considered as tax-free in our system. So grants awarded for artistic activities are tax exempt up till that amount of money. If the grant is used to cover the costs of a private trader, if you are an entrepreneur and you want to use the grant for your business purposes as a private trader, then the taxation differs and you are following the other forms of taxation laws, which means that those kinds of grants are not tax-free in the same sense as the private applicant is getting. All the awarding bodies report all the awarded grants up when those exceed 1,000 euros. We are reporting those to tax administration, which means that automatically the information follows, and that will be part of your tax proposal that you are eventually getting from the taxation authorities. And for taxation purposes, the grant is considered as income in that year of taxation that the money and the grant is paid to you as an artist. And in the cases that, for example, if you get a decision in the last phases of the year, that means that probably the payment will be taking place only in the following year, which means that that is the way in which the taxation is being considered. It's not based on the decision, it's based on the date of the payment of the grant. And the final phase here, still some words concerning how these things are being dealt with in Taike in Arts Promotion Center Finland. We are an expert organization working under the Ministry of Education and Culture, and these are the tasks that are being defined by the legislation. This year, our overall budget is equaling or approximating 45 million euros, and approximately half of that amount of money is being awarded for private applicants, and half of the money is being awarded for organizations, societies, etc. And here's the list of grants that we offer annually for private applicants. In springtime, we had in January, we had open calls for library grants and for public display grants. At the moment, we have ongoing calls for regional grants and artist grants. And for those, actually, I can now also promote that we have next Thursday, on the 13th of March, we have a separate info session for those two forms of grant calls. And in the autumn time, we have had open calls for project grants for specific art forms, and also then the supplementary artist pensions are being applied for in our systems. And apart from this, we also have subsidy for organizations, but here in this session, I'm concentrating more on the possibilities for private applicants for the system, which means these kinds of grants. How to apply for a grant from Taike? We have online services, which is the primary channel that we wish you to apply. 99 plus something percentage of all the applications now arrive to us through the online services. If there are problems that you cannot use the online services, always our customer services aids you to go forward, and we always have also a possibility to use paper forms to apply for funding. The application periods you can see from our website, and as said, we have now two ongoing calls, which are the regional grants and the artist grants. There are always call for application behind all things, and those are different in various application and grant forms, so please always start from reading carefully how that is being defined in the call for application. There is, for example, a list of mandatory attachments, which means that you should always, for example, include the curriculum vitae of your artistic activities as part of the application. And always please apply in good time. The calls end always at 16 hours in the last day of application period. But our online services and customer services are very, very crowded in the last phases of the application rounds. So in case you have any problems, that might cause a problem for you, which means that please, in case you have any questions concerning applications, contact our customer services well in advance before the actual closing of the application. This is a screenshot from our website, and you can log into our online services using the reddish button or magenta button there on the top right-hand corner for the online services. And you can there log into Taike's so-called online services or so-called new online services. We are on a changing phase between two of the services, but to make this more easier for you, if you are now applying for either of the forms of grants that are now open, please check in and click on the one above, log in Taike's online services. Unfortunately, you are then heading up to a Finnish interface, and those services are only available in Finnish or in Swedish at the moment. But in case you have any consideration problems in terms of languages, please contact our customer service. This is a kind of prediction for the future. As said, we are now in between two of the systems, and later on, at least in the beginning of next year, we have transferred all our application systems for this new platform for applications, which is looking like this. And there is a applyforgrants.fi service now under production for all of the application forms that we have in Taike. So this is now on the phase of change at the moment. Some instructions, how do we deal with cases that you have got grants from other funding bodies. Please check always from the call for applications if some other form of grant disqualifies you as a applicant for the grant form that you are seeking. We have some internal rules. Basically, you cannot have two overlapping working grants from Taike simultaneously. We have some rules that consider cases where private foundations have given you grants and you might seek for one from Taike. There are some rules for those. If you have applied for some other grant for the same purpose, this also should be stated in the application form. And the basic rule is that the bigger the project is that you are dealing with, the more important it is for you to also have some other funding for the project. Basically, we don't cover costs or working that is covered by some other funding that has already been awarded to the applicant. This means that if the using periods are not overlapping, then the case differs. So we may award funding for other periods or other project costs that are not covered by direct other funding. What's the decision-making process in Taike? All the decisions are based on peer reviews made by experts, and always there is a special advisor from our organization that is dealing with the issues together with the peer reviewing council. We are always taking in all our decision-making into consideration equality and non-discrimination principles. And we are always also dealing with regional distribution and checking the balance of the language of the applicants. We also take into consideration linguistic and cultural backgrounds and the variety of those from the applicants. So kind of we have a so-called positive discriminatory way of acting in our system. So we try to look at the non-discrimination purposes also in that sense. But please, again here, note that even though you qualify as a professional artist and you are meeting all the requirements, doesn't necessarily mean that you will be awarded a funding, because all the grants are discretionary and there's no automatic right to them. So this is not a kind of social security system. This is based on assessing and evaluating the applications and comparing applicants against each others. In the call for application, there's always notified the due date of the decision making. And generally speaking, it will take roughly 3 or 4 months in our system to make decisions on the grant calls. There are differences in between the forms of grant calls. This is the chart for organization where grant applications are being handled. In the left top hand corner, you can see a list of our national councils for the arts. So they are divided according to fields of art. On the right-hand side, you can see the list of our regional arts councils. And on the lower left-hand side, you can see a list of 3 separate boards that are operating under separate legislation. And these are all peer reviewing groups that are dealing with artists' applications. So always, if you apply as an artist from our system, other artists acting as peer reviewers are the ones that are dealing with your application.